You're listening to The Murder in My Family, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including Missing Persons, DNA ID, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective,
and Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
This episode of The Murder in My Family is sponsored by GEDmatch, the free genealogy website where you can learn about your ancestry and find members you're related to through DNA. Not to mention, help catch the bad guys we talk about on the show. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Murder in My Family. I'm your host, Mike Morford. In this episode, we'll be discussing the untimely death of a little boy with special needs almost 40 years ago, and his mother's shock in finding out that she was suspected in her son's murder. Her name wouldn't be cleared, and the real culprit punished until years later. We'll dive into this case after some quick housekeeping. Independent podcasts like this one depend on word of mouth to bring in new listeners. So if you find that you enjoy this show, please take a moment to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to introduce a friend to the show and invite them to listen. With your help, The Murder in My Family can continue to grow and reach a new audience. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderMyFam or on Facebook at facebook.com/TMIMF podcast. If you'd like to support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon may include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. And thank you to all of the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. One last note. Please support any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsor support that this show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you. And now on with the show. Adam Benjamin Clark was born on May 19, 1977. He was the second child of Joyce and Alan Clark. Though Alan didn't want another child, Joyce refused to terminate her pregnancy. She could only hope that her husband would bond with the son better than he had with their daughter. Despite enduring physical abuse during her pregnancy, Joyce was able to make it to delivery. At birth, it was discovered that Adam had Cornelia de Lange syndrome, a genetic disorder. He was tiny, only had one hand, and had big bushy eyebrows that met in the middle of his forehead. Adam was what Joyce called her little elf boy, or her miracle. She showered Adam with love and attention, and Joyce refused to give up on him despite his special needs and the extra attention he required. Eventually, Joyce and Alan separated, and this wasn't an easy time to be a single mother, and it seems that Joyce's family didn't support her much. Joyce began taking nursing classes, and while there she eventually met a man named Eugene Columbaro, who worked in the records department at Glendale Community College. He was friendly toward her, maybe a little too friendly, coincidentally bumping into her often. And he had children and would sometimes bring them to the campus, and seeing Eugene with his daughters eventually won Joyce over, and she began to trust him. He seemed like a good father and a good man. They began to see more of each other, though Joyce made it very clear from the beginning that their relationship was platonic. She was still actually married, though she was separated from Alan, and she didn't want to get into another relationship. She wanted to focus on her career and her children, and Eugene said he understood. Over the summer of 1983, Alan Clark tried to take Adam and his sister for 2 months to stay with him, but he returned them when Joyce served him with papers for custodial interference. When Adam got back, he was cranky for several days, so Joyce took him to the doctor, and it turned out the little boy had a spiral fracture in one of his legs and required additional care and treatment. On September 24, 1983, 6-year-old Adam had what seemed to be a febrile seizure, and paramedics were called and rushed to help. They gave him oxygen, and he seemed to be fine, and it seemed like it was just a consequence of Cornelia de Lange syndrome. The next day, Adam was a little bit cranky and didn't want to eat much, but he didn't have any more seizures, although he was running a slight fever. Joyce called the few people she trusted to try and find childcare for Adam while she went to her classes. Her neighbors were working or sick, her family lived far away, and a regular babysitter was at college herself. Someone suggested that Joyce call Eugene. His daughters got along with Joyce's daughter, and he knew how to take care of children. And when she approached him, Eugene said he was happy to help Joyce. On September 26th, Eugene watched Adam, who was still sick, all morning for Joyce. She went to her classes and then rushed to Eugene's house to pick Adam up and take him to a doctor's appointment. At the doctor's appointment, Joyce was told that Adam had lost 2 pounds, which was very concerning because at 6 years old, Adam weighed just 22 pounds. Adam was diagnosed with an ear infection and impetigo, which is a skin infection. Adam had impetigo before, and Joyce thought his skin looked different this time, almost like fingerprint-sized bruises instead of oozing welts she remembered from the last time. But she still filled the antibiotic prescription and agreed to keep Adam away from other children until his infection cleared up. She needed to find a babysitter for her classes the next day, but again, no one was available. So once again, she called Eugene, and he said he didn't mind. Eugene even proposed that Joyce bring Adam over that night, so that in the morning she could just head to school, and Adam could sleep in since he was sick. It was about a 10-mile drive from her house in Peoria to Eugene's apartment in Glendale. Joyce arrived just after 10:30 p.m. She put Adam to bed on the pull-out sofa surrounded by pillows. She sat with Eugene on the floor to watch an episode of Heart to Heart as Adam fell asleep. Eventually, Eugene hugged Joyce. He then kissed her and pressed his body up against hers, but Joyce stopped him, and he apologized. At 12:10 a.m. on September 27th, Joyce kissed Adam and headed home, not wanting to stay and make things more awkward between her and Eugene. Eugene walked her to her car, and she left. As soon as Joyce got home, she checked on her daughter, changed into her pajamas, and started to make a cup of coffee before she worked on her homework. Her roommate and classmate, Rachel, told Joyce that while she was out, Eugene had called and requested that she call him immediately. Joyce thought this was odd because she had just seen Eugene, so she called him right back. When Joyce talked to Eugene, he said, "Adam is breathing funny," and Joyce told Eugene to call 911, and she rushed back to his house thinking that Adam was having another seizure. When she arrived, it was immediately clear to her, though, that her son Adam was dead. She was devastated to find her little boy's lifeless body. But the nightmare was only beginning. Joyce had no idea that investigators looking into Adam's death would come to believe that Joyce had killed her own son. They believed that she had beaten Adam after growing tired of taking care of him and his special needs, and that taking him over to Eugene's apartment had been a cover. In the minds of overzealous investigators, the spiral fracture to Adam's leg was proof of her abuse. On January 30th, 1984, Joyce was indicted by a grand jury on charges of second-degree murder, but Joyce maintained her innocence. She had left the sick but very much alive Adam with Eugene, who she thought she could trust. Beyond that, she didn't know what happened. She believed that Adam had died from natural causes, and because Eugene didn't know CPR. But things got even worse for Joyce. Her daughter, Adam's older sister, was removed from her custody by CPS. Now, not just one, but 2 of her kids were gone. Despite the indictment, the charges against Joyce were eventually dismissed, and a criminal investigation into who may have killed Adam ended. The cloud of suspicion loomed over Joyce's head, though, at all times. It seemed to Joyce that the charges were dismissed temporarily until a stronger case could be made against her. But a renewed investigation took Adam's case in a new direction. A second opinion by a medical examiner familiar with Cornelia de Lange syndrome revealed that the timeline of Adam's death was off, and he could not have been killed any earlier than when he was in Eugene's care. In March 2002, years after Adam's death, Eugene Columbaro, who is now going by the name Harley Spencer, was arrested in Utah. He was extradited to Arizona to stand trial on Adam's death. Due to Arizona laws in 1983, Spencer was only eligible for a maximum of 21 years in prison. It was believed that Eugene, aka Harley, had broken Adam's leg while Adam was in his care. The theory as to why Eugene, aka Harley, would hurt Adam was that he had been upset by Joyce's rejection and knew exactly what would hurt her, hurting Adam. 33 years after she was first accused of murder, the district attorney's office finally dismissed the charges against Joyce with prejudice, meaning she could not be charged again. In June 2003, 60-year-old Harley Spencer of Clinton, Utah was convicted of the murder of Adam Clark. He was sentenced to serve 18 years in prison, but appealed and was resentenced to a maximum of 14 years. On January 31, 2011, after just 9 years in prison, he was released, and in April 2014, he completed his parole. Today, Eugene Columbaro, Harley Spencer, is 80 years old and presumably living his life as a free man. Joyce, a retired registered nurse, wrote a memoir about Adam, his death, and what she went through. The memoir is called From Miracle to Murder, Justice for Adam, and much of the content in this episode comes from Joyce's memoir. I highly recommend reading it. Almost 40 years after little Adam's death, Joyce looks back on Adam as her special child with a strong and joyful spirit, and she helps promote awareness of PTSD, wrongful accusations, and Cornelia de Lange syndrome. Joyce sat down with me to discuss her son Adam's brief but love-filled life, the pain of losing him, and about the nightmare that ensued following his death when she was suspected in his murder. That conversation is coming up in just a moment. This episode of The Murder of My Family is sponsored by GEDmatch. We've all heard the wonderful news of how genetic genealogy, along with GEDmatch, is helping to solve some terrible, long, cold murder cases. To date, GEDmatch has helped see over 500 cases resolved. Some of those very cases we've covered on the show before they were solved, including the cases of April Marie Tinsley, Lindy Sue Beekler, and Sherry Domingo and Greg Sanchez, who died at the hands of the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo. And hopefully with GEDmatch, there will be a lot more cases solved. GEDmatch isn't just catching the bad guys, though. It's also relied on to help identify Jane and John Does, and to help exonerate innocent people who are incarcerated for the wrong reasons. And this is where you come in, and you can help. Because the more DNA profiles uploaded into the GEDmatch database, the more chances there are to help bring justice to so many people. But GEDmatch is so much more. It's a free genealogy website where you can learn about your ancestry and find family members you're related to through DNA. Even if you've tested using different companies. If you've already done a DNA test with a direct-to-consumer testing company like 23andMe, Ancestry, MyHeritage, or Family Tree DNA, it's easy to upload your DNA profile to GEDmatch, whether it's to help law enforcement provide justice for so many people that deserve it, or just to find your family roots. Here's how it works. First, go to the company website where you've had your DNA testing done and download your DNA profile as a DNA data file. Next, go to GEDmatch and upload the file for processing. Make sure to opt in for law enforcement searches that cover violent crimes and missing persons cases. If you want to just focus on being helpful to finding identities of unidentified bodies, you can simply opt out, which will exclude your profile from violent crime case searches. Within 24 hours of your upload, you'll have access to a suite of DNA tools allowing you to delve deeper into your results. You can compare your DNA profile to everyone else's on the site or to a specific person, plus much more. Some people have the misconception that law enforcement gets access to your raw DNA when you upload your profile, but that's not true. Law enforcement does not get to see your raw data when you consent to allow your data to be included in those types of searches. Law enforcement has the same access as any other civilian user of GEDmatch. They can only see your name or GEDmatch alias if you've entered one, your email address, and how much shared DNA there is between you and the unknown profile they've uploaded. GEDmatch is a highly secure site built with consumer security in mind, where users are in control of information they upload, and they can delete their data whenever they want. By joining the GEDmatch community, you can help see violent criminals brought to justice, missing people located, and unidentified remains given a name, not to mention dive into your family roots. Join GEDmatch today by going to gedmatch.com/MIMF. Once again, that's gedmatch.com/MIMF. Hi, Joyce, and welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on to discuss your son Adam's case with us.
You're more than welcome. It's my pleasure.
Oh, thank you. And this episode's going to be a little different from most of the ones I've done. We're going to sort of let you tell the story of what happened. There's a lot of detail, and this is different in many ways from many episodes because you didn't just lose your son, but you were unjustly accused of being a suspect in the case, and that hung over you, I know, for a long time. And I can't imagine a more frightening scenario than losing a child to violence and then being accused of of being involved with it. So we'll get into all of that, obviously. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit about your little boy, Adam, what he was like, and a little bit about him?
I would love to. Adam was my little special child. He was born in 1977 in an era when not a whole lot was known about the syndrome with which he was born. I had no warning. Back then, there were no ultrasounds. There were no monitoring systems, genetic testing done. And so when Adam was born, he was born a whole lot smaller. Now, he was my second child. My first child was born perfectly healthy, beautiful, 8.5 pounds. And when little Adam came along, my pregnancy, I never really got that big. And so I had this premonition beforehand, and that's all the warning that I had, that something was going to be a little different. And it surely was. When he was born, instead of doctors and people saying, ooh, ah, what a beautiful child, you are so fortunate, there was just a very long, prolonged, pronounced quiet and a hush and an OMG. And so I could immediately see that they were concerned, and I immediately became concerned because Adam was a little tiny thing. Instead of being 8.5 healthy pounds, he was not even 5 pounds. He was full term. And the most obvious difference was that instead of 2 hands and 2 arms, he had 1 hand, 1 arm, and then his left, where his arm should have been, was kind of a different looking digit. It looked like a big thumb with a possible joint. His face was different, and I'm not saying that it wasn't beautiful because he was a beautiful child, but his face was different. The best way I can describe it, he was born with, it's called Cornelia de Long syndrome, and that's almost comparable, but not quite, to a child being born with Down syndrome. Down syndrome children have a very distinctive facial feature, and there's other things that go on with their little bodies. CDL children have a distinctive facial feature, and along with their facial features, they're usually missing limbs, or their limbs are very small, or if they do have all of their limbs, they're going to be very different. And so the first thing my doctor told me was not congratulations, you have a beautiful child, but was, oh, your child has Cornelia de Long syndrome. We do not expect him to live. There's nothing that we can do for him. Why don't you put him away in an institution? We'll give you a name of an institution, and he could die there. And then you don't have to tell people. Just go home and pretend like he died and have another baby later.
Wow.
And of course, that was very
cold, very cold and sort of insensitive, not good doctor's bedside manner, I guess.
It was very cold, very insensitive, but that's the way it was done back in the 70s. And so, I went into shock. I was already physically compromised, and so emotionally it became somewhat shocky. And instead of comforting me, I was given a drug and I was put out and put into a recovery room. But all this can be found. I did write a book about my experiences. All that can be found in the book, and there's a lot of detail. But within hours, the first time I got up, was able to walk down and look for him. I found him in a crib by himself against the wall, not in a warmer. He wasn't with people. He wasn't being taken care of by anyone. But the moment I was able to really, really look at him, I bonded with him, and he became the beautiful and the perfect and the healthy child that my first daughter was. And there is no way in hell I was going to put him anywhere except bring him home with me. And I would do what I could do for him. But he did eventually, with a lot of help, a lot of therapy, multiple surgeries to correct issues that he needed to have corrected to sustain his life, He did grow into a little bubbly, tiny little, I called him my elf child. He could smile and he could laugh and he could feel pain. He was just this bubbly little forever baby. He didn't grow very much, but he grew enough. He didn't say a whole lot, but he said 2 words, and those were enough. And he became the little forever elf child that I was blessed to have. Women usually see their little babies grow up to be, adults and they leave home. And I knew Adam never would. And I felt blessed and honored.
Mm. So you dealt a situation where your child had some disabilities, but it was still a blessing you felt that you were able to take on, and you did take on, and he, defied sort of the doctor's prognosis, it sounds like.
He defied the prognosis because I defied what they predicted. And I found a series of doctors and therapists who would agree with me and worked with me to not only prolong Adam's life, but so that he could have some quality of life. And he definitely did.
And so this, he had, did he have multiple surgeries during this time?
Yes, the first surgery occurred when he was 6 weeks old, and it was a simple surgery for most babies, but not for him because he was compromised. It's called pyloric stenosis. He couldn't eat. In order to take Adam even home that first time from the hospital, I had to learn how to tube feed him. These days, they would probably have put in it's called a G tube, into his stomach to feed him directly into his stomach. But in those days, every 2 to 3 hours, I had to insert a feeding tube down through his mouth into his stomach in order to syringe in some formula. And so I brought him home after I had learned how to do that. And so at about 5 weeks of age, I had to tube feed him every 2 to 3 hours around the clock, every 24/7. It usually would take me about an hour to do it. It was not a simple procedure with him, but I did it. And then about 5 weeks, he started throwing up his food. And then he did what's called projectile vomiting, which means he just, with force, would projectile vomit anything that was put down him. And he did that until finally it was conceded that he had a pyloric stenosis, needed that corrected. That means the opening into his intestines that would allow him to keep his food in his stomach had closed, and that needed to be opened up. And so that was his very first surgery at 6 weeks. And at the time, I handed him over to the physician who was willing to do this, because not all of them were. I thought for sure that would be the end of his life. And it was very, very, very difficult. I thought I was saying goodbye to my little son. But he survived that surgery, and he had several after that. And with each procedure, the doctors and I would discuss, is this necessary to sustain his life? If it was not necessary to sustain his life or improve the quality of his life, then we wouldn't opt for surgery. If it was necessary, then we would. One of his most serious surgeries was, the kidneys have these tubes called ureters, and they lead to the bladder so a person can excrete urine. And his were all kind of cross-eyed, messed up. And so after multiple kidney infections, it was considered necessary to reroute those tubes. And again, each time he had surgery, because he was so tiny, it was always, would this be it? Would this be the last time I saw him?
So it was definitely a challenge for you, but you persevered and gave him the best care that you could. And I want to move on to when things took a abrupt change in your life and obviously what happened to your son. Can you talk a little bit about that day and the circumstances about what happened to him?
Well, I need to fill in some more background. At the
Okay.
time I was raised in a misogynistic religious cult, a very extremely harsh one, where women are told that education was of the devil. Our primary function was to marry and to marry young, to shut up, and to have babies. And so anything other than a high school education, even then I had to fight in order to graduate from high school. So anything past high school education was denied me. And so I became engaged before even going on a date because dating was not allowed. So I became engaged to the first man who proposed to me in front of my parents. And then I married, and then I had 2 children like I was supposed to. During that marriage, my husband was extremely violently abusive. We don't even need to go into details. The details are in my book, but he almost killed me on more than one occasion. And some of this abuse was, of course, witnessed. My brothers and sisters saw the bruises. My parents saw the bruises. And so when I became pregnant with Adam, he tried to force me to miscarry through his beatings. And so when Adam was born, of course, I was blamed for that by my husband. It must have been something I did, or because I disobeyed him and wouldn't have an abortion. And so not only did I have to fight Adam's diagnosis to have him live, I had to battle to allow him to live and allow him to even come home because I was afraid my husband would kill him. After a while, my husband did settle down, and he allowed me to keep Adam at home, and I was going to keep him no matter what. So that led up to eventually my husband did leave, and I was in the process of reconstructing my life. I was in the process of leaving the religious cult in which I was raised because I fought for my children. My children needed a better life. They needed to, period, live. And so at the period of time when Adam died, I was not doing anything wrong. I was not a drug mom. I was working. I was paying the bills. I was supporting my 2 children on housekeeper's income. And I had decided that my children deserved more than what I had been given in life. And so I decided, and then Adam had so many multiple health problems. And my oldest daughter, by that time, was developing dreams of having a good, normal life. And I knew I needed to support that. So at the time of Adam's death, I was accused of all kinds of things, but I was doing exactly what I needed to do to support my children and to create a better life for them.
I'm assuming now we're up to around 1983?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in 1983, I had, previous to that, by a couple of years, I decided to take some college courses so that I could become a nurse so that I could better care for Adam, because doctors have their own language. Medical people have their own language. And it's not that they talk above anyone's head or don't mean to communicate. There's just a different language. And there are some instances when I became very frustrated because I didn't understand the language. I was a primary care provider for my son. I battled for care for him, and I needed to understand what they were saying. So I decided to take some college courses. So I signed up at a community college. I started out with, I think, Biology 101. Didn't know what I was doing, but I enjoyed the class. So when I wasn't taking care of my kids, I was trying to go to school. By that time, Adam was in a really advanced kindergarten that had accepted, it was a really model classroom. They had accepted children like him in their class. So when he was in class, or when my oldest child was in school, that's when I signed up for a course, and I was also working. So at that time in 1983, I had finally been accepted into a nursing program at a community college. Unfortunately, this community college had a philosophy, and they still do, that nursing comes first, and no matter what else is going on in your life, per semester, if a nursing student missed more than 2 classes per semester, not just class, but per semester, they would be kicked out of the program and have to start over. And because Adam was very sick most of the time, he had almost no immune system. He needed therapy. He was a very high demand special needs child. I had a hard time finding a babysitter. I had a DES babysitter, but she wouldn't take him whenever he was ill. And by that time, my family had completely shunned me because I had left the cult. And so finding a babysitter was a challenge. And that led up to what happened to Adam.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about that? What exactly happened and how that unfolded?
Yes. It was only, I think, in September. Well, he was murdered September 27th. So I was like 3 weeks into my first semester of the nursing program. And he became sick very easily. He had cough, or you name it, infections, fever. And so I had already missed 1 class. And so I was desperate to find a babysitter for him so I could continue the program. So a friend of mine who was an older nursing student who I really respected, because by that time, I was not 20 anymore. I was heading into, I think, late 20s, 30. But anyway, she told me that she had a son who was a very good person. He had 2 children, and she volunteered him to babysit my son. And yes, there's been speculation throughout these years that somehow he and I had some sort of connection, conspired together to murder my child, to cover it up. There was no conspiracy. There was no connection. Just I tested him once to see if he would be okay with Adam. And I had seen him with his 2 little daughters, because this friend of mine, like I said, was older, and it was her adult son. He had 2 daughters. I saw him react with the daughters, and I gave him a test run. I had him babysit Adam for an hour, picked him up in that hour, and everything was fine. So when it came up, when Adam was sick again, the DES sitter wouldn't take him. My parents would not help me. My siblings, I had several siblings. I came from a large religious family. And they said, absolutely no way. You're going to college, and that's against their religion, and that's of the devil. We're not going to help you. And so she said, don't worry, Joyce. He can babysit during this class to make sure you get there. She and I went to school together. So that's when I took him, Adam, to this man's house to be babysat so I could go to school. And that's exactly when my son, was murdered. Adam was within this man's care for exactly, I think it was 48 minutes. At the time I took my son to this man's house, and his name is Eugene Columbaro. He changed his name to Harley Spencer after the murder. It was his way of hiding, I believe. I can only conjecture. But at the time I took Adam to this man's, the babysitter's house, there happened to be a police officer, Mark Campbell, he was kind of I think he was a first-year policeman. And he happened to be right there in that parking lot, and he recorded what time I took my son in. And then about 48, wasn't even an hour. And then when I came back to pick up Adam, Mark Campbell wrote down the exact time I went to pick up Adam. And at that time, a call for emergency services had been put out, and Mark Campbell was the first person behind me who responded. I was when I went to pick up Adam, he was being held by the babysitter. He was limp. He was unresponsive. He was white. I grabbed Adam, and I had just the week before, as a nursing first semester, first month nursing student, I had just learned CPR. I had never practiced it. I had just learned it. So I was the first one to grab Adam out of the babysitter's arm. He was not responsive. I put him on the floor, and I started CPR. And Mark Campbell, the officer, was right behind me, continued it.
And he was not able to, between the two of you weren't able to save Adam.
No, not at all. No, I wouldn't let them stop though. I wanted everything done. So I think I went in the ambulance with Adam to the hospital, and I was there until he was pronounced.
So you must have been a wreck. You must have been in shock and going through something, parents can't even imagine at that point.
Yes. I kept going in my mind, please don't stop, please don't stop, please don't stop, because after 6 minutes, I knew at that time, brain damage can happen within 3 minutes. Permanent damage can happen in 6 minutes, and then death. But I wouldn't let them stop performing CPR. And I kept saying to myself, it's like, they always said he was going to die. All the medical, every doctor, that Adam's going to die. And I said, no, he's not. And he got to be 6 years old, and I could not accept that he was dead. Of course, what parent could, no matter what the condition of the baby. And then within minutes or hours, I don't remember. I think I was there all night. And when I managed to get home after Adam was pronounced, I think it was my brother who picked me up, took me home. I don't recall. But within minutes of my being home, I mean, the details are in the book, but within minutes of my being home, I had barely been able to talk to my oldest daughter. She was only 9-year-old baby herself at the time. Adam was 6, and I held her, as I looked at the calendar today. It's been 40 years, but talking about it never goes away. Never goes away. So I had only enough time to hold her and tell her that her little brother had gone to heaven. And then I got a phone call, and it was a man called, I will never forget his name. I will never forget the sound of his voice. But it was a man called Eloy Yasasi. I am Eloy Yasasi, and you murdered your kid. You murdered him. You murdered him. Ha, ha, ha. He laughed. We caught you. We caught you. You murdered him.
And who was this person?
Okay. Eloy Yasasi was an assistant to the coroner his name is Heinz Karnexkig, who is the coroner, medical examiner of the Maricopa County. And he's the one who did the autopsy, because they did an autopsy on Adam right away. And he's the one who was, Eloy Yastasi was the first one to accuse me of murder, because Heinz Karnexkig prematurely pronounced that Adam was murdered. Yeah, Adam was murdered, but he said I did it. And I've written down a whole long list. It took me several decades. It took me writing my book. It took me 14 years to write it. And the reason I wrote it, I never understood why. Why was I accused? Why? And there's multiple reasons why, but it took me decades to understand it and to collect the evidence, to collect the reports, to collect everything I could get my hands on as to why.
So this goes from just being an awful situation that it is, losing your son, to now here you are, someone's accusing you of murdering him, yeah.
Yeah, I was the last person that would ever harm my son. I was the warrior mother who kept him alive. I mean, the doctor delivered him, and most of the people afterwards in the 70s, they would institutionalize children like him. In fact, there was a home. I can't recall right now. But there was even a home they told me to go to, because that's where they wanted me to put him before they would allow me to bring him home. No one wanted me to bring Adam home because they thought they told me he was going to die. So what's the point of bringing him home? And I said, I want to hold him when he dies. Okay, he's going to die. But I want to be there. I want to hold him. I want him to know that he was loved for the special little boy that he was. He's not going to die in some stinking institution unloved by his mother. I went to visit one of those places. It was mandated that I do before I brought him home, before they would allow me. And it was a nice place. It was a very lovely place. The children were clean. They were well cared for. But my son was not going to die there amongst strangers. If he's going to die, he was going to die in my arms. And that was taken away from me. He didn't die in my arms. He was murdered. And so I can say this, I went into a state of shock. I stayed in a state of shock for probably many years. And it's total 100% state of denial. How could anyone harm a baby? And yet I was accused of it. I knew I didn't kill my child. How can anyone harm a child? And so that it took me many years to accept that my son was murdered, because I knew I didn't do it. I was the only one who was accused. So I thought there was some horrible big mistake, and there was. But I thought he died. Somehow in my mind, I explained it away because everyone was saying he was going to die. So I thought, okay, he died of complications of his syndrome, Cornelia de Lange syndrome, and there are many complications of it. At the time, Heinz Karnexkig was afraid that Adam had meningitis, and everyone who did CPR, including Mark Campbell, the police officer, had to be tested for meningitis. And CPR can also kill a baby. He was a tiny baby. He weighed 20 pounds when he died. He was 6 years old, and he weighed 20 pounds. And anyone who does CPR effectively, part of that procedure is you crack ribs in trying to start the heart again. I am now a registered nurse. I've been one now. I was one for 30 years. So I know these things now. I didn't know them back then. So that's why I denied that my son could have been murdered. I thought it was all just one big horrible mistake. And it took me many years. It took the trial that finally happened in 2001 to 2002. It took somebody being convicted of murder for me to accept, okay, my son was murdered.
And how did the process go from you being accused to ultimately somebody else being found guilty of this crime?
That is a very good question that took me many years to answer. No one had that answer for me. But it took me going through, I have stacks and stacks of original and copies of documents and trial transcripts and testimonies and depositions, and you name it, I have everything that could be available. I have it. And it took me 14 years to go through it for me to even understand it. Okay, so I was accused of murder, and it didn't take long for me to be my daughter. I didn't lose just one child. I lost both my children. Within hours, days, maybe a couple of days, my 9-year-old was taken away from me. I never got her back. Never got her back. So I lost nothing short of my world. I lost everything that meant anything to me. I lost everyone who ever claimed they loved me, and the two people I truly loved the most, both my children. So my son was murdered. I thought he just died of natural causes, but I was charged, and within 2 days, my daughter was taken away. And I can go into finally understand why.
Yeah, if you would.
Yeah. Why was I charged? Because Heinz Karnickskid, the coroner at the time, did not understand his own findings. He said that my son died within a certain period of time from the time of his injuries. And yes, Adam did receive many injuries. The timing that Heinz Karnickskid gave placed me within Adam's care. And then the babysitter, the only investigation that was done on the babysitter had a known history, not known to me, not even known to his mother, but known to his ex-wife. This babysitter had a known history of abusing his children, his own children. That was never investigated. So the babysitter, when asked, told the police officers that I had brought him a dead baby to babysit. They believed him. Then my ex-husband, who had a known history, witnessed of abusing me and the children. He was asked about me, and my ex-husband said I was an abusive mother. No one investigated me. No one asked the doctors or the therapists or the teachers or my friends or my neighbors or anyone. No one asked them about anything about me. So I was an easy target. So here's Heinz Karnickskid, who got the timing wrong, and it took another coroner to go over Adam's autopsy to say, this guy is he's wrong. This child died within minutes of receiving the injury. I did not hand a dead child to the babysitter. The babysitter killed this child within minutes of him receiving the child to babysit. Oh yeah, Eloy Yasasi, the guy who first accused me, later on, years later, he was actually convicted of selling photos of nude autopsied children. And Heinz Karnitzke, the coroner, later on was deemed to be an incompetent coroner.
Hmm.
And the story goes on and on. There was just a series of cascading events that I was a single mother too. I had no finances. I had no one to protect me, and I was an easy target. Easy case closed. I charge her.
And so eventually the truth came out that you didn't have anything to do with this. And this other person was held accountable.
I'll go backwards a little bit. At the time of Adam's death, I was finalizing the divorce from my ex-husband. So I had an attorney who was working with me pro bono because I had no money. And when this happened, I called him up. He was an angel, Thomas Novak. I said, help me. I don't know what to do. He referred me to a couple of other criminal law attorneys. I interviewed them. I knew I needed help. I interviewed them. Nobody agreed to take my case because I had no money until I came across one called Bryce Beeler, who agreed to represent me for the cost of a retainer, and that's all he ever charged. And he was able, at that time, find a discrepancy in what Heinz Karnitzke said. And so because of this discrepancy in what the coroner said, he was able to get charges dropped, but charges were dropped without prejudice, which means they could have brought them again. So they couldn't prove that I had done it. I couldn't prove that I didn't. And so I went into a legal, the best way to describe it is a legal limbo land, where nobody could prove anything. And in the meantime, I went through the years. This is taking years. Through the years, I went through juvenile court to try to get my daughter back, but because charges still hung over me, she was never returned. The first thing she was told by her father, and I was able to show this years later, I always suspected it. Later on, he said in open court that the first thing he told her was that your mother murdered your brother, you can't live with her anymore. So I did lose 2 children, not just one. So the years went on like that in legal limbo land. Charges dropped without prejudice means you're guilty, but they can't prove it. So seriously, I lost everything and everyone I loved. My family shunned me, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, I was in the newspaper. I think I was on TV. I don't know. I just tried to live my life really quietly as best I could.
Was there, when your name eventually it was cleared though all the way, is that correct?
Okay. In 2000, I think it was 2001, it was a detective named Bruce Formney who called me up and said the case has been reopened. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be charged again. But I worked with him, and I worked with the detective, the first, Mark Campbell, who did CPR on my son, who was the first responder to do, other than me, to do CPR on Adam. He had been given the case, and he gave it to Bruce Formney, and Bruce Formney was known as a bulldog of a cold case detective. My son's case went cold for 18 years, and then it was reopened. And eventually, all these discrepancies, when they finally, I say they, the Glendale Police Department, the attorney generals, the district attorney, the state attorney, when these people have a long list of names, when these people finally investigated it thoroughly, when Bruce Formley investigated me, and then he investigated my ex, he investigated these people who were all involved, and they found that everything I had said was the truth. I had never, ever said any kind of a shade of a lie, whereas all they found in these other people were lies and incompetencies. So the correct person was finally convicted. I think it was like 2002, and the closing 2003. I gave my victim impact statement, but I was finally deemed not guilty, and the correct person was guilty. But it still took a number of years. It took, I think, a total of like 35 years or so to finally get my name cleared. I finally had charges. Even after this person was convicted, charges still hung over me without prejudice, which means I could be charged again like a co-conspirator. And it wasn't until many years later that I finally had those charges dropped, so that they're charged with prejudice means you're not guilty. We're not going to bring these charges again. So even though my son was murdered in 83, it took, and the correct person was convicted 18 years later. Myself, I wasn't cleared for almost 35 years.
And when that day finally came, did you feel like you were vindicated, like the truth was finally out? Or by this time, did you feel like it was too late, that a lot of your reputation was gone and you had this hanging over your head the entire time?
Oh yeah, I've had this hanging over my head my entire life. I know what it's like for people to look at me sideways and say something like, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's got to be some truth in these accusations somewhere. And I lost like I said, I lost everything and everyone I had. And the hardest thing was to have my daughter lose faith in me. That's never been restored. No one's really ever apologized to me. I have received no compensation, no restitution, no apology, nothing from anyone except Mark Campbell and Bruce Formney and Jeanette Gallagher. She was the prosecutor who finalized this case. They did apologize, but they didn't cause the damage.
And so, here you are all this time later. You haven't got any restitution. You haven't got any apologies. Your son, you lost your son, and even it affected your relationship with your daughter. It had to feel like the whole world was upon you, on your shoulders. But somehow you found the strength to document what happened and tell the story in a book. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Yes. Okay. So my son was murdered in 83, and I was kicked out of practically my family. I was kicked out of the community. The college that I was attending at the time, I was a straight A student, and they kicked me out. And so I kind of started over. I did change my name from the name under which I was charged. I just went back to my maiden name. That's as much hiding as I ever did. And I started over school because by that time I had nothing and no one. And I said, you know what? I started being a nurse for my son, and now for me, I will still become one, because I'm going to do my best to try to prevent anyone else from going through this. So I started out over again at I'll just say Grand Canyon University, Christian-based university. At that time, it was a college. It was very small. And I started over there. I lived quietly, didn't tell anybody about what happened. I could not, because it would start all over. The sideways glances, the accusations, the shady, the suppositions that people put on me, like, you must have been doing something wrong. You were probably taking drugs, and who knows what you were doing. And I did nothing. I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing for my children. So I started over again, and I ended up got my grades back up. I was about to graduate with my BSN, and I was graduating magna cum laude, but then a representative from the Arizona State Nursing Association came and gave us a little talk. And she said, before you are allowed to take your NCLEX exam, you will be asked these questions and you have to answer honestly. And I thought, I've never been dishonest. You will be asked, have you ever been arrested for any crime? Have you ever been accused of any crime? So forth and so on. I'm going, oh my God, now what? It terrified me. All this work I put into, I was very deeply into debt. I could barely feed myself, because at the time too, my ex-husband came to me and I was paying child support for a child I was not allowed to see. So I went and I wrote this paper for the state board. It became kind of a dissertation, explaining to myself why I still believed at that time that Adam died from Cornelia de Lange syndrome, that he died of meningococcal meningitis, and he died of the side effects of CPR. I truly, totally believe that. I was, like I said, I was in a state of denial. And so I wrote this dissertation. I presented it to the state board. I said, this is what I was accused of, but this is why I believe my son died. He was not murdered. He died of these things. And it made so much sense. Even the Arizona State Board, her name was Joy Ridenour. She was the president of the time, and she said, this makes total sense. Here, you're okay. Take your NCLEX. So I took my NCLEX, and I passed, and of course, and I became a registered nurse. And then not just a registered nurse, in my first year of nursing, I witnessed a woman give birth to a baby, not like mine, but this baby didn't live. Mine did. And her baby was just tossed into a red biohazard bucket like it was done in the 80s. And I said, this is never going to happen again on my watch. And so I, with my head nurse, created a perinatal bereavement program for all women so that their babies could be treated with respect, and they would be treated with respect and high regard. And this program eventually went hospital-wide, it went county-wide, and now it's required. It's a state requirement, and I think most states, to have some kind of perinatal program for women. It wasn't until I always asked myself, what happened? What happened? What happened? Why was I charged? And so if Adam died of natural causes, why was he considered to have been murdered? And it wasn't until after the trial that I came, or during the trial, during the initial investigation of the trial that took place in 2002, because I went through multiple trials. I went through civil, I went through juvenile to try to get my daughter back. I went through civil to try to get a divorce from my ex-husband. And so each time I had to present my case saying this is why I believe Adam wasn't murdered. So when the real trial took place, the criminal trial, I thought it was going to be a trick. I thought they're just tricking me. They're going to get me to talk. They're going to try to get me to say something that I haven't said that isn't true. So it took that trial to convince even me that my son was murdered. And then when I realized my little son was murdered, any protection my brain was giving me was gone. And then when that came to pass, it's like, why was I charged? Why? When I didn't even have Adam at the time of his death. Why didn't they investigate? Why couldn't they have prevented this? It would have saved my little girl her life, because she ended up living with my abusive ex-husband, and he did abuse her in ways I'm not even free to talk about. Mm. So that's when I started writing. I wrote a letter. It was going to be a letter to my little daughter, who is now a grown woman. I said, this is why, honey. This is why. And so I started collecting. I already had a pile. I started collecting trial transcripts, all the depositions, everything I had said, my notes from years past compared with my notes, my personal journals, because I had journaled a lot of this, and collected information from anyone who had anything to do with it. I either had to buy it because they're not cheap. Transcripts are not cheap. But I collected everything I had, everything my attorney had, anything anyone would give me. And it took me years because at the time too, I was working, and to put it all in chronological order, from Adam's medical records to his surgeries to everything I did for him. Everything in chronological order, and I called a timetable. This happened then, this happened then, this happened then. And then why did these occur? And then I started collecting newspaper articles, research done on these people who were in charge of my life, who were in charge and responsible for the destruction of my life, the false charges, the destruction of my life, and the destruction of my 9-year-old. Because she was damaged. And so then, only then, did it start to make sense. The incompetencies and it was a man's world. And here I was, a single mom of 2. I had no money. And I was an easy target. And they took it and they ran with it. But it started out just being kind of that. And then started being a letter, and I had all the facts, and I'm going, no, my daughter needs to hear how I felt going through this. And so it is a document, but it's so much more than that. I put in what I am feeling and thinking and seeing and going through at that time.
And it's called From Miracle to Murder, Justice for Adam, and it's available on Amazon, or is there any other places people can find it?
It's the easiest place is on Amazon, because Amazon is available worldwide. You can get it through Barnes and Noble, but then you have to order it first. It's just, if most people, I think, have Amazon, and like I said, it's almost worldwide.
Yeah.
So, and I'm about ready to go ahead.
I was going to say it has very good reviews too. So I think people that have read it have has had some good things to say about it. Has it been in any way therapeutic to help you write this, to help you get the truth out?
It has been therapeutic, but it took me a long time to get the guts to print it, to have it there. And so I had my attorney check it out, because I name names. When I have a document to prove the name I'm using is correct, the times are correct, the dates are correct. I did change a few names, my children's names. I changed those. I did change some names to protect the innocent from the guilty. It was very terrifying, because at one point I had people, I won't say these names, but I had people threatening my life if I printed this document. And it is a document, but it's more than that. And I thought, well, whatever, this has cost me my life. Here it is.
So you just laid it out there.
Careful. Yeah, I was very careful about, of course, I'm not perfect. I am human. I am fallible, but I made it as close to any documentation I had that I could get out there. So it was therapeutic for me. Like, for many, many years, I lived very quietly. I did my best to live under the radar, because I had targets at me. I mean, I was, when Adam died and I was accused of murder, I mean, the neighbors, they would just, it was terrifying to be pointed at and to say, you killed your kid. Through most of my career, it's like, what if somebody accuses me? What if this? What if I'm accused again? Whoa, what do I do next? And these things and the thing is, if this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone.
It's scary.
Any child can be murdered, and any parent can be accused.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to share this story with us. It's very tragic and sad, and at the end of the day, you've gone through so much and documented it in this book, and I appreciate you coming on to share your ordeal with us and how you got through it and came out the other side.
Well, how I got through it is, it's like there's no really manual. What do you do if you're a parent and you're accused of murdering your child? There's no manual. Yeah. But I know that I did two things right. These two things saved my life. Number one, I refused to be interviewed by the police without an attorney. I didn't have an attorney. I was just some young 20-year-old. But I'd seen enough movies. You don't talk to the police without an attorney. And that actually, in a way, that worked against me, because unfortunately, too many investigators believe that if you want an attorney, that means you're guilty. No, it does not. It just means that you know your rights. So I asked for an attorney. I got an attorney so nobody could twist and turn my words. The second one was that I told the truth from the day one. I never deviated from the truth. And I wrote things down in kind of like, this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened. I wrote it down. And so I stuck to the truth. Not one deviation. I mean, of all the years under which I've been questioned and investigated and followed and fingerprinted and photographed and depositioned and lawyers on the other side who tried to twist and turn my words, and there were no words to be turned and twisted because I said the same thing every time. And I was told that's what saved my butt.
And here you are now to tell your story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on. And again, I hope people will go out and read the book, and we'll definitely put a link in it in the show so people can find it.
Thank you. Also, I do have a website. I just refreshed it. Just type in my name, JoyceALeffler.com.
Okay. And they can find the book there, find more on your journey. Okay, very good.
Yes.
Again, thank you so much for taking the time, Joyce, to talk with us and share your story.
Well, I feel very, very honored. I love talking about it. In fact, I have my office. I have a shelf, as most parents who have lost a child or had a child murdered. I have his pictures up all the time. He's with me all the time. So I love talking about him because when I can say his name, Adam Benjamin Clark, he's still alive in my mind and in my heart. And he always will be. So I say thank you, Adam. He gave me so much. Yeah.
And that's a poignant way to end the episode. Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. I'd like to thank Sonny Landon for writing and research assistance in this episode. We'll be back here soon with an all-new episode of The Murder of My Family, and I hope you'll join me for it. But before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.